in verse 2. Continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in it with thanksgiving. At the same time, pray also for us, that God may open to us a door for the word, to declare the mystery of Christ, on account of which I am in prison, that I may make it clear which is how I ought to speak. As you can see, I put the idea of when God closes a door. And that's one of the things that I've heard several lessons about things that we attribute to the Bible that aren't actually in the Bible. And sayings like cleanliness is next to godliness, or God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers, which is one of my biggest pet peeves when I hear that one. And when God closes the door, a lot of times we say these things because we're in an uncomfortable situation. We're not sure exactly what to say. So we'll say something like this that we've heard before and we think is fitting, and it doesn't always work because we're giving biblical credit to something that's not in the Bible, and then if it doesn't come true, then we sort of make God look like the liar in the situation when really we were the ones who used it incorrectly. So the problem with that is things like, if I say cleanliness is next to godliness, then people can sort of have the wrong priorities. I would say that this is one of the dustiest harvests that I can remember since we've moved here. I was mowing the other day, and you could actually tell the green grass where I mowed and the grayish silver grass from where the dust had laid. And I had to stop and pour water on my back window of my car because I couldn't see out. There was so much dust from it sitting outside. So if I were to say cleanliness is next to godliness, I'm not doing so well in that situation. And then to improve on that, then I get to a Mary and Martha situation where I have the wrong priorities and I'm looking at things because someone said that and I think that's right, but it's not what the Bible teaches. God gives his strongest battles, or his toughest battles, to his strongest soldiers. The Bible doesn't show us that. God took unremarkable people in remarkable situations and made them win with sometimes marching and trumpets. So it's not necessarily the strongest soldiers. So if you will, imagine a situation when someone comes up to our shepherds and he says, hey, I'm having some problems. I was committing adultery with someone at work, and because of that, I lost my job. My marriage is on the rocks, and so because of that, I started drinking to deal with the situation. I got some financial trouble. I made some bad deals. Now I've started gambling to try to get some of the money back, and my wife is about to take the kids from me. And the shepherds say, God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers, and sends them on their way. And they think, well, I'm doing the right thing. The reason Satan's coming after me is because I'm being such a good follower of Christ that I could continue doing that. And that, like I said, is sometimes when we get in uncomfortable situations, we say things and it can lead people down the wrong path. I didn't even finish the rest because I've heard it so many ways. Sometimes it's even when God closes the window, he opens a door. But when God closes a door, he opens another one. And we're going to look at some situations where that's actually the situation. When God closes a door, it presents another opportunity. We just read from Colossians 4 about opening a door. There are some examples to start off with, and I will use times where there's doors and gates, or even the hedge that was put around Job. Interchangeably, I think there are situations where they're used that way scripturally, but some of the reasons why we have those, why doors are used in the Bible, we can look in Nehemiah, 1 Chronicles 9, where it talks about building walls and gates and doors and having very specific ideas for the gatekeepers and what they should be doing, their job, and who they should be watching out for to protect the people that are inside from danger that is outside. Jeremiah 49 talks about a city without walls becomes plunder. What keeps people from coming in and taking what they want, and what keeps animals from coming in and destroying what's left. Mark 13 talks about watching the door to be prepared. We'll read that again later. And like I said, there's the hedge around Job that protects him. So there are ideas that these doors and walls protect us. And an interesting thing that we may not think about is that this is stating the obvious, but a door is either open or closed. And so even a door that's open just a little bit is still opened, right? It may not be easy to pass through, but it's still open. And so as we consider some of the ways that doors are used, keep that in mind too, that a door that's open just a little bit can allow things to enter and exit that shouldn't be. So there are definitely some situations in the Bible where the door is used as an opportunity. We're not going to read all these. We'll read a couple of them. But in Acts 14, it talks about opened a door of faith to the Gentiles. In 1 Corinthians 16, verses 8 and 9, it says, "But I will stay in Ephesus until Pentecost, for a wide door for effective work has opened to me, and there are many adversaries." Hosea 2 talks about a door of hope. And in 2 Corinthians 2, in verses 12 and also 13, it says, "When I came to Troas to preach the gospel of Christ, even though a door was opened for me in the Lord, my spirit was not at rest because I did not find my brother Titus there. So I took leave of them and went on to Macedonia." So in this situation, there is a door that's open, an opportunity, but he wasn't at rest. His spirit wasn't at rest because he couldn't find Titus, and so he sought out a different situation for that. Isaiah 26 talks about open the gates that the righteous nation might enter in. And in Psalm 118, open to me the gates of righteousness. I read, starting off, Colossians chapter 4, because that's talking about opening the Word, a door to the Word, and that's one of the things I'm hoping to do while I'm up here. But this is a sermon that is based off a class that I taught in the back in 2022. For the most part, this is the same sermon that I presented in Indiana, where my parents attend, back in March. And there's going to be a slide very soon that I wrote an article that's on our website off of that. And I have changed it a little bit, learning new things, listening to the Charlestown Road podcasts that are available. They did a VBS on doors this summer, and Jason Harden did several lessons with some of the very same ideas that I had here, so I've adjusted some of these things. But one of the things when I was in Indiana I talked about was, for those of you who are here and remember, about 17, 18 years ago, there was prayers for more people to come and do work. And I think there were about 17 people who moved in within a year and a half that time to come in. And so I was talking to them, where my parents attend, very small congregation. My parents are approaching 80, and they're probably about the median age, give or take. So it's very small, and I encouraged them. I said, pray for people to come and do the work here. Pray for people to come and be an influence on the city of Lebanon and the surrounding areas. And I would encourage us to continue doing the same. I've talked to several people, both here and in other congregations. It's not just here. And if you feel like I'm talking about you, technically I am, but not critically. I've been hearing a lot of, I'm tired, I'm burnt out, I need a break. And I get it. It wasn't too long ago, Brent asked me to teach, and I said, Brent, I really want a break. I'm tired. And I get it. There's so much work to be done, and there's a lot of work that's being done, and that I know of. There's a lot of work, probably even more work that's being done that I don't know of. But there's more work to be done. The Pews are mostly full today, but they're not every time we meet. I would love, sorry, shepherds, but I'd love to have the shepherds have a problem of, what do we do for more classrooms? What do we do for a bigger building to meet in? What do we do when we have so many people who are willing to do the work here that we have to practically make a waiting list? And like I said, I get it. I'm not being critical of anyone here, and it's not just here, it's everywhere. Congregations that are nearly 3 times this size are still having problems finding teachers to teach the class. Congregations that are a lot smaller have had teachers who've been preaching for 10, 12 years straight. There's lots of work, not just teaching, but there's people. I see cars moving in the background. There's lots of work to be done, and we need more workers. So pray. Pray for more workers to come and work with us. Pray for more workers who will make it a priority to serve and teach God. In Genesis chapter 6, and you can open to Genesis chapter 7 if you want to read that as well, but in Genesis chapter 6, Noah is given specific instructions on building the ark, and it talks about building the door and where it should be and the measurements and how it should be set up. But in Genesis chapter 7, the next chapter over, in verse 16, it says, "And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut them in." The article that is still on our website was based on this slide a lot. The idea that the Lord shut them in when it was time, when they had prepared. In 1 Peter 3, it compares Noah in this situation to baptism and salvation. It talks about God's patience with them, how he waited, and how 8 people were saved because of that. And that's where we start to see the connection of the door and the point that I would like for us to get from the scriptures this morning. In Hebrews 11, it talks about Noah in his faith, in his reverent fear, prepared for events that were yet unseen, things that he didn't even understand and know what was coming. And that's what faith is. We're preparing for things that we haven't seen, but God has told us to be prepared for. And if you want to, if you're still in Genesis chapter 7, go over to Genesis chapter 4. We'll be reading verses 6 and 7. I said there are times where a door is used as an opportunity, and in this case, you could make the point that when God closed this door, it still presented another opportunity for Noah and his family. But for everyone on the other side of the door, in the reading it talks about it condemned the world. So the entire world minus 8 and some animals, the closing of the door meant something completely different. It wasn't an opportunity for them. So when God closes the door, it's not necessarily an opportunity for everyone. And they were responsible for listening, obeying, and getting in the ark before God closed the door. In Genesis 19 and Judges 19, we see a door in Sodom and in Gibeah where sin is on one side of the door and the people on the other side of the door are being saved, just like the example with Noah and his family. In Genesis chapter 4, starting in verse 6, the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry, and why has your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it." So many times in the Bible, not even time wouldn't allow me to even crack off a few of them here, but just so many times the Bible separates things. Even from creation, we see light and dark. We see life and death, we see righteousness and sin. And sometimes that door is just a separation of the two, keeping sin and righteousness apart. Exodus 12, we have the doorpost of the Passover. Exodus 12, starting in verse 1. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall be for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month every man shall take a lamb according to his father's houses, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his nearest neighbor shall take according to the number of persons. According to what each can eat, you shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male a year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of this month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight. Then they shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. They shall eat the flesh that night, roasted on the fire, with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, they shall eat it. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roast it, its head with its legs and its inner parts. And you shall let none of it remain until the morning. Anything that remains until the morning you shall burn. In this manner you shall eat it, with your belt fastened, your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt that night. I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are at, and when I see the blood I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. Taken by itself, it's hard to see how these doorposts or the blood shed on the doorpost means a whole lot without the rest of Scripture to tell us what that means. The idea, we're looking at a time where, I just made reference to it not too long ago, but the idea that they were slaves in Egypt, and then there's comparison to slavery to sin, and that they're getting ready to prepare for the wandering in the wilderness, just like we are preparing in the Christian life to wander on the way to the promised land. But note that there were a lot of details in there that aren't specific to today's point, but the idea of having their belts fastened, their sandals on their feet, their staff in their hand, to eat it in haste, the unleavened bread, so that they could go at any time when God had prepared that for them, is an example that's important as we look at some of these other lessons as well. Freedom from slavery required the death of a lamb, an unblemished lamb, and it shed blood for them to be saved. Ty read from John 10, talking about the door of the sheep. I'm not going to read that again because Ty did a good job. But note that we see there the good shepherd doesn't leave when times are tough. The good shepherd knows his sheep. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. But in the reading that Ryan read in Luke 13 and in Matthew 7, one of the things that we see is that the gate that leads to life, or the door that leads to life, is narrow. Like I said, I listened to some of Jason Harden's sermons, and he talked about different trails. He mentioned one in Tennessee. I know I've been on one. I don't think it was the same one, but they'll have a place that's called like Fat Man's Squeeze or something like that, where it's a narrow area. Those things are shrinking. I used to be able to get through those a lot better when I was younger. But there are places where you can't walk through with a backpack on or anything like that. You have to carry it through. Maybe you have to turn sideways so your shoulders are too broad to go the other way. But the idea of that, it's narrow to get through. There are also places that we've been where it's a lot easier. If you've ever been to the City Museum in St. Louis, there are areas where it's a lot easier for my kids, and especially when they were younger, to get through than it is for me being 6 foot plus tall. and having to crawl around on old achy knees, things are narrow and it makes it hard to get through. There is a limitation on that. But those who enter in through Jesus, through the door, will be saved. The tomb door is another example that we have. In Matthew chapter 27, starting in verse 62. The next day, that is, after the day of preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered before Pilate and said, "Sir, we remember how that impostor said while he was still alive, 'After 3 days I will rise.' Therefore order the tomb to be made secure until the third day, lest his disciples go and steal him away and tell the people he has risen from the dead. And the last fraud will be worse than the first." Pilate said to them, "You have a guard of soldiers. Go make it as secure as you can." So they went and made the tomb secure by sealing the stone and setting a guard. In chapter 28, verse 1, now after the Sabbath, toward the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing white as snow. And for fear of him, the guards trembled and became like dead men. But the angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you seek Jesus who was crucified. He is not here, for he has risen, as he said. Come, see the place where he lay." So why did they seal the door? They said, because he said he was going to rise again. We don't want someone else to come in and steal him out and make the story worse than it was to begin with. So seal the door, make it secure. Like we talked about, there are reasons for doors, for security. And they wanted to make sure that no one got in to tamper with it. I said up here that God breaks their seal, sort of minimal in the scheme of things. And what I mean by that is that when we're talking about Jesus overcoming death and we're talking about salvation and redemption, the fact that a rock was moved was pretty small scale. But it's an example of a door, and on one side they thought they had conquered Jesus, but when he's out, it's an example of separation of heaven and earth, spiritual versus physical, life and death. They tried to seal in death, but life overcame that when the door was open. And in this case, the door was shut so that God's glory could be seen. Another one, a veil, not necessarily a door, but there were, at the crucifixion, we need a little bit of background before we go to that. And in Luke chapter 23 is where we'll be going. But some of the background, there was only one entrance to the temple. There were 1 Kings chapter 6 tells us about the temple doors. And with that, they had one section, one curtain, one door that separated the people from the outer court to make it something that was special. They had a second one that separated the outer court from the holy place, so even more devotion to what they were doing. And then the third one was the curtain that separated, or veil that separated, the holy place from the Holy of Holies, which was recognized as the very presence of God. And only the high priest could go in there once a year on the Day of Atonement. And even then, there were very special, specific steps of what had to be done to enter into the Holy of Holies. It required blood of a sacrifice, someone without blemish. And in Luke 23, starting in verse 44, we see that it was torn from top to bottom. It was now about the 6th hour, and there was darkness over the whole land until the ninth hour, when the sun's light failed, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. Then Jesus, calling out with a loud voice, said, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And having said this, he breathed his last. Now, when the centurion saw what had taken place, he praised God, saying, Certainly this man was innocent. In Hebrews 6, we see this a little bit in more detail, more understanding in verses 19 through 20. We have this as a sure and steadfast anchor of the soul, a hope that enters into the inner place behind the curtain, where Jesus has gone as a forerunner on our behalf, having become a high priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. And then in Hebrews 10, starting in verse 19, Hebrews 6, talking about Jesus going in before us like a priest. And Hebrews 10, starting verse 19, Therefore, brothers, since we have confidence to enter the holy places by the blood of Jesus, by the new and living way that he opened for us through the curtain, that is, through his flesh, and since we have a great priest over the house of God, let us draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. Jesus shed his blood so that we can enter the holy places where God dwells. So I can't say that every time, given the examples that we've looked at, and there are others, that every time when God closes a door, that he opens another. But there are purposes to the door, and there are lessons that we can learn from the examples that are used. And that there is a separation. There are times where the door separates righteousness and sin, life and death, eternal life and condemnation. But we do know, as some of the songs that we've sang already this morning, and in Matthew 25, that those doors, maybe there is opportunity on the other side, but it's narrow and it's for a limited time. Matthew 25, starting verse 10, while they were going to buy, the story of the 10 virgins, and while they were going to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins came also, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But I answered, Truly I say to you, I do not know you. Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour. In Mark 13, I told you we would get to that at some point. Mark 13, starting in verse 34. It is like a man going on a journey when he leaves home and puts his servants in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to stay awake. Therefore, stay awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come, in the evening or at midnight, or when the rooster crows, or in the morning, lest he come suddenly and find you asleep. And what I say to you all, stay awake. And finally, in Revelation, the 3rd chapter, in verse 20, Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and eat with him, and he with me. So there's a limited time. There's knocking on the door, and we have to be able to respond to that, and we have to be watching the door. We have to be prepared. We have to be like those in Egypt with our belts fastened, shoes on our feet, our staff in our hand, and ready to go. The door is narrow, but it does present opportunity, as it says, that those who enter through Jesus through that door will be saved. He's knocking. We have to answer it like Noah and the family. We have to be willing to get on the ark and be ready to go whenever that situation is presented to us. Let's think of these things as we stand and sing.